voice. Fortunately, Vlada was singing less than me. Somebody commented that multi-stakeholder negotiation requires shouting, but it was more related to strong air conditioning in the room. We are just one day after the NETmundial last evening at 8 o'clock. The final document was adopted. And the main purpose of today's webinar is to brief you what happened at NETmundial. I will start with the general reflections, and then Vlada will go through the document and indicate what were the main outcomes. Well, the NETmundial was a great event in many respects. It attended. It's not completely clear how many people attended, but some figures are between 800 and 1,000. But apart from the high attendance, what was more important was the method that was used and the overall approach to the negotiations. You can imagine that there were just a few queues, 4 queues, 1 queue for governments, civil society, technical community, and business. And in each queue, speakers had to wait and they had 2 minutes for intervention. Another great achievement was
16 hours.
Hello? Somebody said that. No. Another great achievement was that there were remote participation was so far the best in InternetGovernance meetings. We had a big screen. There was a high quality of transmission, and remote participants it was clear that they were part of the meeting. Secretariat of the NETmundial has a major challenge to process almost 1,300 comments that were received. Therefore, drafting of the final document was a tricky exercise, something between open process and diplomatic negotiation, especially in the last phase. And we will reflect on this methodology and the approach in our papers later on, that we will be hearing what is new when it comes to diplomacy and the way how the negotiation was conducted. There are quite a few interesting insights. Therefore, multi-stakeholder process moved beyond, let's say, IGF, more talk and exchange to real drafting process. And it's probably one lesson that could be learned from the IGF itself. There is a possibility to draft in a multi-stakeholder environment in open and inclusive process. It is a challenging. It was very taxing on the secretariat and people involved in the process, but it was at the end achieved. Vlada will now guide you through the main elements of the Sao Paulo consensus or deal, and I will conclude with just one more metaphoric remark. It was a mundial, 2 months between the soccer mundial. There were a lot of plays, a lot of nice dribbling shots, but at the end, I think that we don't have exact winner. Many people enjoyed playing the game, but what is good for diplomatic compromise, equally many are not happy with the outcome, completely happy with the outcome of the NETmundial, which is usually a good sign that compromise was reached. The problem is to what extent different players are happy or unhappy with the outcome. Russia and China explicitly indicated that they don't support the outcome document, while India asked for more time to consult with the constituencies back home. Civil society expressed their uneasiness with the part dealing with mass surveillance, which was watered down in the last phase of negotiation. But you will hear from Vlada.
Thank you. Good morning to everyone. This is a great sacrifice on our side to be with you at 8 o'clock in the morning and yesterday evening when everything finished. Basically, we went for dinner and a couple of caipirinhas, not too many. Everyone was quite shocked to learn that we are going to do the webinar at 8 o'clock in the morning, but this is probably the best time for the other time zones, so we will sacrifice on that. Throughout these couple of days, if you have been following the NETmundial through social media or our blogs, you could have noticed that we reported constantly, especially on the topics which were controversial, and there was a couple of controversial topics. And when I was thinking about how to go through this today, I figured out that we maybe have focus too much on what we have lost in this process rather than on what we have got with the final document. So try to make a balanced run through the document to emphasize both the good and the bad things, or something like that. I'll try to be a bit louder. I hope you can hear us better. Maybe you can put down to see the chat window just in case we are. Yeah. Okay. So running through the document, first of all, for those of you that might not have followed, there were the two main chapters of the document. One is Internet Governance Principles, and the other one is the roadmap for the future mechanisms. The first document was drafted was based on the 188 contributions from all the stakeholders. The second one was basically putting into context the responses by number of the governments which are members of the of the high-level committee, where Jovan is also seated. So the second draft was drafted based on their comments, and then this third draft was part of the process within these 2 days, where, as Jovan explained, there was a committee which was trying to put all the comments in the document. So the changes that were inserted quite interesting. There was bigger, or the biggest, one of the biggest controversies was the surveillance, and it was a question whether first in civil society insisted, not only civil society, that mass surveillance is present in the document as one of the things that should not be allowed, and that in case mass surveillance and interception of the data is needed, it should be done in a proportionate and necessary principle, which is something that the US strongly opposed. And the final document, we can discuss more into details, these tiny little nuances in the wording, but basically at the end, to a large extent, US managed to put in their position so that mass surveillance is present, is mentioned, but there is no disclose on the proportional necessary measures or the principle. Instead, it says that the surveillance should be done in accordance with international human rights law, which is still something that should be respected. An interesting outcome was also the insert of the clause related to the copyrights and the protection of the rights of the authors and creators. This is probably the only topic that was not initially included in the first document nor in the second document, but the corporate sector managed to push through the relation to the copyrights and the protection of the rights of the authors as established in the law. So it should still be, of course, linked to the national law. The second or the third interesting or controversial issue was the liability of intermediaries, mainly internet service providers, but also other internet companies, for the content and what is happening on the net. There were two streams over there. One was pushed by the corporate sector, which was asking for the limited liability in the sense of the content and the acts of the users, and they managed to push it through in form of that the intermediaries should have a limited liability, which would allow creativity, innovation, and so on and so on. The second track of this discussion was related to the civil society requests that the internet service providers should be liable for interception and surveillance if they do it without the juridical orders in a way. I can try to reflect to the direct document. The problem is that I have the PDF on the computer, which I can't launch now. So that might be complicated, but I'll try to, because I have the old version of the document where I'm basically tracking the changes, and the number of the paragraph is not the same. But we'll try to open it in the meantime, and people try to find it. I'll try to find it. And we can probably go back to these controversial parts to analyze them back to, link to the paragraphs. Then we had, you want to add something?
Just to add something, we'll have a hypertext comment in the document and an analysis that we received in follow-up to more detailed document. Now, this is a zoom-out view, just mapping what has happened. And webinar will last only, that's maximum 1 hour. Therefore, you will receive the comments in the document in more detail.
Yeah.
Can you say the title of
this was in the previous document. This was related to human rights part, which is basically the first part where the document starts. So in the human rights, most of these changes have been added basically. But you will see the number of paragraphs, so that I don't track it now and lose too much time on that. Yeah, I'm just looking at the final document. Final document that they sent us, or that is available on the website, doesn't really mention the number of the paragraphs. So, but
the title is Protection Intermediates.
Yeah, I think it's to be somewhere. Okay. Then, what was interesting was let me see. The multi-stakeholder, of course, was something that was quite a controversial topic. And on one hand, of course, the proponents of multi-stakeholder and let's say equal footing terms were requesting the multi-stakeholder is explicitly mentioned in that with that precise wording. At the same time, India and the other actors from the other bloc, let's say the intergovernmental bloc. I don't like putting these actors into blocks, but there is an evident gap in positions and polarization when it comes to multi-stakeholderism. The opponents of, so to speak, equal footing in multi-stakeholderism were insisting on extending or changing this multi-stakeholderism. So the final document basically has a compromise which says that the internet governance should be based on democratic multi-stakeholder approach. This word democratic was inserted by the Indians. They basically wanted to extend it even more and to say the legitimate representative and democratic multi-stakeholder model, but it ended up with democratic multi-stakeholder model. And another very important, which basically gives space to multi-stakeholder model as it is, with possible further interpretation if in this sentence there should be something more for governments or not. The other very important aspect of this, the title of that one again should be Internet Governance. I'm talking about the previous, the second draft. In the second draft, there was the Internet Governance Process Principles. So we are talking about the second part of principles of the document, which is Internet Governance Process Principles. Over there, the second important aspect of multi-stakeholder discussion or dilemma was the definition of or the mentioning of the respective roles and responsibilities. This is something that has been mentioned in this agenda, and this is something that has been largely debated and disputed in the previous years. And there was an expectation that NETmundial might make a move in defining a bit further what does that mean, the respective roles and responsibilities, and does it mean that, or does it exclude equal footing? So does it mean that the governments have their respective role, which we all know, and then the other have their respective roles, but it's not the equal footing? And there were tendencies not to put respective roles and responsibilities in the document, but to try to elaborate more and make a move forward. So what happened is again kind of a compromise. Respective roles and responsibilities stay in the document, in a couple of places, not only in this section about Internet Governance Process Principles, but it is also expanded. So it's respective roles and responsibilities should be flexibly interpreted in accordance to the issues at hand, which was in a way pushed by some of the European countries to try to say, okay, the roles and responsibilities might be preset to some extent, but it basically they depend on the issue we are dealing with. So issue to issue, we can discuss what should be the respective roles and responsibilities of the stakeholders. Jovan, if you want to jump at any point with a comment, or you can just comment later on. Another interesting controversy in a way, throughout the document, again in this part, but also later on in the document, was the mentioning of the consensus and the consensus-based dialogue or consensus-based internet governance process. We've seen strong opposition from the, again, mainly Indian government. Indian government was very active. They were opposing strongly the consensus-based process, and they were trying to find a different wording. However, it ended up with a consensus in a number of references throughout the document. But at some of them, it was mentioned, in this part of the document, it was mentioned consensus to the extent possible. That was probably an attempt to make a compromise with the, especially the Indian government, but not only. And this might have been the reason of their dissatisfaction at the end with the document. On the other hand, one of the interesting outcomes which was pushed by the mainly by the Council of Europe, as we could learn that in corridor talks, it refers to, again, it's paragraph 18 from the second draft, about the accountability with regards to the process, where it was inserted that the governments have the key legal accountability for the human rights, for the respect of human rights, which is something that was basically known, but was not put in the document and was now explicitly included to the document. Another big controversy with regards to the principles was net neutrality. Brazilian government was also one to push strongly for net neutrality because this is one of the cornerstones of their Marco Civil, which was adopted a couple of days ago in Brazil. On the other hand, there was, and of course, civil society was pushing strongly for net neutrality to be explicitly mentioned in the document within the principles. On the other side, we had the European Commission and the corporate sector, which were pushing this back, saying that NETmundial was not the place to discuss it. They were not saying that net neutrality is not a principle or should not be considered the principle, but NETmundial shouldn't be the place to discuss it. Net neutrality was not in any of the drafts, and it didn't find a place within the principles of the final draft, which was a great dissatisfaction of the civil society at the end. But net neutrality did find a place in the final part of the document, which discusses the topics that should be further elaborated. We'll mention that at the end. A good outcome is when development aspects within the roadmap, so the second part of the document we mentioned, is that not only developing and developed countries were explicitly mentioned, but also small island developing countries, which was in a way a success by the, I suppose to a large extent, Trinidad and Tobago, which had huge delegation in Sao Paulo. The enhanced cooperation part of the roadmap stayed as it is. It was mentioned. There was a reference, enhanced cooperation as referred to the Tunis agenda. And there was not much elaboration on that, more than there may be some expected that there would be a move forward again with the roles of the government. But it was the clause that the CSDD process on enhanced cooperation should be supported, and basically that the enhanced cooperation implementation of this process should be treated as a priority by all stakeholders, right? Then, of course, a very important part, and I believe personally, and I think there was a general feeling around the room, that one of the biggest successes of this document is the support for the IGF. There was almost, well, I would say, unanimous support for the Internet Governance Forum. I can't remember we've heard any comment against it, not even from the government that might be expected to oppose it. And the clauses or the references to the Internet Governance Forum are quite specific. That's also something that the European Commission was very strongly pushing for as a tangible outcome of NETmundial. So not only that the support to the IGF Forum is expressed, but also the support to the improvements of the IGF Forum as expressed by the UN CSTD working group on improvements. And also the deadline was suggested for the implementation of these improvements by the end of 2015. Because the document is not binding, so this is just a recommendation. A recommendation that firstly the UN General Assembly will have to take into, or will definitely take into consideration this autumn when deciding about the future of the IGF, but also the mark of the IGF will have to work stronger in order to achieve the improvements. Besides that, there was the proposal that the outcome documents of the IGF should be more tangible, whether they are in form of the recommendations or analysis of policy options, but they should be more tangible. The IGF mandate should be extended beyond 5-year terms, which is an interesting success in a way. There was strong discussion or strong support for the improving the financing system of the IGF, including the donor options for the budget. I believe this language could have been even stronger, but it is already quite strong. And then at the end, that the IGF should become kind of a hub, or should take the role of a hub to establish links with other processes like NETmundial, ICANN, ITU, whatever happens, Freedom Online Conference, so on, as a central place where the discussions or where the topics will feed in and feed out from. And the last controversial and very important part, I believe, was ICANN issues and ICANN transition and IANA process, where there was a reference. Let me just try to find that particular part of the document. Yes, where, okay, of course, what we expected, the text was not too much changed. This is point number 4 in the roadmap part of the document. Text was not almost at all changed because it was in a way pre-agreed before. Everyone was quite happy with the transition process in that sense. Accountability, openness, transparency were raised as important aspects of that. There was an added reference, which was also pushed in a way by the European Commission to a large extent and opposed by ICANN, that in further discussions there should be careful or attention paid to the adequate difference between policy and operational aspects of ICANN and IANA. So to distinguish the discussion between the operational and policy aspects of transition and of accountability of ICANN and IANA. There was a session also at the end of the NETmundial where ICANN was basically giving updates on what's happening with the process, and they said they will do it in all the next process wherever they can, including the ICANN 15 meeting in London. And to conclude, the points to be further discussed beyond NETmundial, and that's in a way where that was the place in the document where the controversial topics that could not be agreed on were placed in. So that includes, that's I think part 4 in the previous document, points to be further discussed beyond NETmundial. It was different roles and responsibilities of continuing the discussion on roles and responsibilities of stakeholders. Secondly, jurisdiction issues, which remained unchanged from the first draft of the document, and that is something the European Commission was strongly supporting. Was the change from the document, which had as one of these topics to discuss further, code of conduct and related indicators for the Internet governance ecosystem. But the code of conduct was understood, as we also blogged in a vocabulary blog that it has the connotation of the international between the governments, especially in relation to cybersecurity or cyber conflicts area. So there was an opposition, a strong opposition to that wording or putting code of conduct within the document. And the final document says that we should be discussing more in future the benchmarks that and the indicators for the application of internet governance principles. So in a way, tracking how this process of internet governance principles is being implemented. The last bullet to be discussed in future was net neutrality. It was not mentioned as what we need to discuss is the models to protect net neutrality, but it was stated as we should discuss net neutrality, which is quite vague, and that might be considered as kind of a victory of the corporate sector, at least when it comes to this stuff. I will stop here. That's more or less it. Of course, number of references to the forthcoming events like NETmundial, like versus plus 10 process IGF, and so on, that should take into account this document and elaborate more on that. But we'll see. I suppose the strength of this document and the whole experiment, diplomatic negotiations in a multi-stakeholder environment here, will be shown or will be known only in the next period when we see whether the implementation really went. I will stop here. Jovan, off to you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Vlada.
Maybe you can come closer to the microphone.
Oh, yes. Sorry, I have to shout a bit. Thank you, Vlada, for quite a detailed survey. What I can just add are a few points. One is the developing countries in this compromise got a stronger reference into the versus process. And the underlying message, in, let's say, zoom out view, was whether NETmundial was sorry, a start of the new phase in internet governance or just continuation of the versus process. And if you analyze the question of respective roles and responsibilities, which Vlada mentioned, versus equal footing, therefore respective roles are related to the versus process. Equal footing was related to this new idea of the NETmundial multi-stakeholder approach. Therefore, this is the main dilemma. Is NETmundial the start of the post-versus process, or is it just another phase in the versus process? And on that point, if you carefully analyze, and we will do it as soon as we recover from this diplomatic tsunami, we will analyze document and points where we can say that there is continuity element and when there is element of the introduction of the new approach. And it was, I think, the most contested part in the negotiation, including reservation which came from India, which was a reservation about introducing the new language, which will depart from the adopted language in. That is, I would say, the underlying issue. Are we entering into something completely new, which we don't know how it will look? It has to be charted, or we have still the framework of the versus process. Now, for the framework of the versus process, obviously, there's the strong support for the IGF, which is one of the pillars of the versus process. And that element of the balance between two has been underlying throughout the negotiation and the preparation for the NETmundial. In the very beginning, IGF wasn't very prominent, but later on it came into the discussion.
What I wanted to add is my satisfaction, or in a way surprise, not satisfaction, but rather surprise, with the type of the process that we have seen here. Basically, it, as Jovan explained, it is several sequences of drafting the document in which the contributions are being received both online and now during the meeting in Sao Paulo. And there were drafting committees or committees of experts which were appointed by the organizers, by NETmundial, in collaboration with Vanet and the whole community to some extent, but basically it was the role of the organizers, Brazilian organizers, to appoint the people, expert committee that are going to be helping draft the document. And then we had about 800, or as it was announced initially 800, but at the end we see that NETmundial says there were almost over 1,200 people from 87 countries.
The room was full.
The room was really full, yes, crowded. These people are basically anyone of us that had interest and availability, including funding, of course, to show up at NETmundial. They basically, at the end, didn't really refuse any kind of application for the participation, but simply people couldn't go there. And there was a great number of remote participants as well. I think they are counted in this total number. So you had a huge number of people from different stakeholders which simply came to the process. The same approach was for the comments in the previous round. Simply anyone could send the comments to the document. And then the drafting process was, or the expert committee was trying to combine and make compromise between different proposals, making, as Jovan said, everyone equally unhappy if possible. And at the end, the final biggest controversies, especially whether something as controversial as like surveillance should end up in a document or not at all, and in what form, was elaborated yesterday evening before the closing ceremony, before presenting the document, by both the expert committee and a high-level committee. And it lasted for like 3 or 4 hours, I think, Jovan.
Yes.
It was really an intense negotiation in a explicit sense, but between the experts in a way. This process was open to anyone to listen, so the room was crowded, but no one could intervene with the dialogue between the experts. And we came up with a document on which some put a reservation, like Russia and Cuba. Some said need to consult back, like India. Some complained, like part of the civil society. But basically, all in all, many of them were happy because we achieved something of ground for the future discussions. So there was a lot of discussions in corridors if this kind of a process should be, in a way, copied, or some aspects of that process could be copied to the IGF in future, or any different forum to make it more output-oriented and even satisfy the governments, bring them more into the process because it's an output-oriented process. We will see if the needs for that show up and the IGF doesn't respond to that. Maybe we'll see NETmundial 2015, NETmundial 2016. If the need does not appear for that, maybe IGF will remain unchanged. Or maybe the IGF will take some of the notes from this process and probably within the next 2 years or 3 years, implement some of these kind of document drafting mechanisms, very innovative, multi-stakeholder document drafting, document negotiating mechanisms. But it's up to us to see.
Okay, ask a question for me. How do you evaluate the level of government participation? I noticed that, for example, government queue was I mentioned that there are queues in front of the microphone. There are 4 microphones. The government queue was the busiest one. Therefore, later in the negotiation, the government got possibility to have 2 speakers because it was rotating 1 speaker from on each microphone. There was participation of government, but not very equal. I would say that Africa, for example, was completely absent, with exception with a few interventions from Egypt. Arab world was not very present. Small island states, with exception of Trinidad and Tobago, were absent. China was completely absent. Response to the and I guess they had delegation, but they didn't participate in almost any negotiation. They didn't make the reservation. Although they indicated they were not completely satisfied with the process at the very beginning, but they didn't make a reservation as India did, for example. It is very interesting how China basically abstained from this type of processes. And I think the problem is there was a lack of participation, for example, from most countries, and that was definitely one of the weaknesses of NETmundial. There was a strong participation, very strong from the European Union, from India, from United States. Russia was active, and then Latin American countries were very present and involved in the process.
One thing to add with regards to the Arab region, you know that we did this data mining analysis of the contribution documents. Within the contribution documents, there was, I think, only one, if I remember correctly, contribution from the Arab region governments, which was Tunisia. There was no other contribution from Arab state governments, and even though we did see a number of people, including I think the representatives of Saudi Arabia, in the room, they were very quiet. They just didn't take the floor. They didn't put much contributions during the discussion. Probably the only government from that, let's say, bloc, so to speak, of the governments that was really active was Indian government.
Okay, if you don't have any other question, please follow the Geneva Internet Platform website. We'll be doing some debriefing activities next week during our course on Internet governance, and we will be also making comments on the document that you can see what we just summarized in more details.
I get one comment that I promised. Do we have time? I hope we still have some time. One comment from a colleague from Trinidad and Tobago who was here with us yesterday. He was supposed to join also, but he's traveling now, Kevin Swift. So he sent me an email asking to try to comment on this, well, maybe just to mention, and we can try to comment. And he basically, I'll read his email. He said, NET has proved to be an inevitable intersessional event of the IG calendar, which has provided much needed discussion on key internet principles and roadmap. While the origins of the event are well known, NETmundial has taken a highly commendable step in having different stakeholders focus on their commonalities and informal setting and so on. After a lengthy opening session and initial remarks, participants were advised by at least two panelists preceding first working session that this is an experiment, loosely bringing together multilateral and multi-stakeholder cultures. Accepting of these circumstances, what were the parameters of this experiment to be measured or observed, and wouldn't there have been added value in briefing all participants about such parameters prior to the meeting? It would appear that procedural matters were completely addressed in an ad hoc manner, which could have probably had an unanticipated benefit for tactical participation as opposed to strategic or strategies typically employed by traditional delegations and diplomacy. I think, however, while inclusiveness was certainly a goal of the meeting, democracy was somewhat sacrificed to meet that goal. Some goals can only be speculated and some will remain unclear. NETmundial could have possibly been framed as a sandbox for contemporary diplomacy, but the project charter might have been misplaced. My comment is being made from the perspective of an island stakeholder who sees the internet as a key tool for development and therefore would naturally have particular expectations along these lines. I think this is quite an interesting food for thought.
This is a very important aspect. You know, when you are in the room, you have a feeling, and there is a common feeling, atmosphere, energy in the room. And there is excitement, and there is a sort of a feeling that something new is happening. But the problem is that we always do not see who is absent, and are those who are absent, do they matter? And they matter. I mean, you have at least half of the world who was absent. With the big countries, China, which was absent to a large extent, most of the Africa, and you will receive our analysis of the statements Arab world. Therefore, in that sense, there is a question of definitely Ekman and ask it. There is a question of the legitimacy of the statement, and it will be one big issue, I'm sure, coming into the forthcoming months, where the NETmundial document will be used as some sort of reference document. There will be this question of the legitimacy, which will open really long debate. Therefore, one perspective is perspective from the room, and what was mentioned in this comment, there was ad hoc procedure, but there was a genuine attempt to include people. There were comments, there were open floor, open microphone. Therefore, there was a good, generally speaking, good feeling. But outside the room, there was a remote participation, but again, it's limited mainly to civil society and academia. The question is, what about governments that were absent?
And at the end, we had the Russian government, which was basically, which based its, in a way, protest to the final document exactly on this, that the process of drafting the document was not transparent enough, was not inclusive enough, was not known well enough, that it was law that was done ad hoc, and that it was not done in a democratic manner. So the comment stays. Now it's a question whether this is something that whether it was worth sacrificing these parts and excluding some actors for the sake of the outcome document.
Now, this is extremely valid point, and we'll comment on that. This process was conducted in extremely short span of time, less than 6 months, with New Year, Carnival, and Easter holidays. Now, in the process, one thing that personally frustrated me was that you make a comment and you don't have any reply what happened with your comment. For example, I made one small comment that they don't use term capacity building, which is completely passé in international lingo, UNDP circles, sustainable development. The term is capacity development, not capacity building. It is more inclusive. That was completely ignored. No, it's a minor thing. It's almost language issue. Okay, I don't have any big country to represent or any country Diplo, and that's fine. And I didn't make big fuss. But when you have a country like India or UK or big countries who made the input and they don't see what's happened with their input, then okay, we can accept that, we cannot accept that. Let us negotiate. Let us do trade-off. It creates frustrations. And I notice it and encourage even countries who supported the process express frustration in this aspect. And I coined the term socialization of the text. Text has to be in a way socialized. You have to accept it. Okay, some of your proposals may be refused, other will be accepted, but through that interchange, through that social context, all countries will, in a way, accept the text on more substantive way. This is a problem with this open-ended processes. It reminds me to some extent of this BBC, Al Jazeera, CNN programs, Have Your Say. And okay, I have my say, and what happened with my say? Does it make any impact? Is it just thrown in some sort of black hole? This is going to be the major problem, and we will reflect on that, especially for governments who would like to see that their comments are considered. Maybe not inputted in the final document, but considered. And that I think was the main criticism for the process.
I think what Deidre mentioned there, when you said, okay, you're just someone who's coming on behalf of Diplo, and that's true what she says. But in a way, in that context, you're representing all 7 billion of us. So anyone of us who was at NETmundial was basically representing the other little bit less than 7 million people, right? So in that there is a weight of the process.
Okay, yes, but I'm speaking about a very practical level. These people, when they go back to capital and diplomats, they present reports and they have to say, they have then questions. Why did you accept this? It's not in accordance to our country's position. And you know, diplomacy is a risk avoidance profession. And especially if something can be career damaging, and in multi-stakeholder processes, there are so many unpredictable things, and it makes diplomats uneasy because their careers can be affected. I'm just now trivializing the issue, but it matters in this process. Therefore, there are many, I would say, layers of discussion that are open on the procedural level that we'll have to reflect on. As a matter of fact, Vlad and I will start in half an hour meeting, the academic meeting, which will reflect on NETmundial. It's hosted for the next 2 days here in Sao Paulo.
There was one question also from the Adrian Nicolo regarding the proposal of Ecuador to host NETmundial within the next 6 months. It was a buzz around the corridors, or it was discussed, but I didn't have the impression that anyone took it too seriously, for a couple of reasons, not because of Ecuador, of course. But firstly, there is still a big reservation whether this should be a one-off event or it should become a process. Dominant or predominant feeling that I got from the corridors, there was no official discussions about it, about any NETmundial next year, but from the corridors, my feeling was that people are rather like, let's see if the IGF and the existing processes can be supported as suggested by NETmundial, then we don't need to waste our energy on further processes. Secondly, 6 months, even if it happens, is way too short. And we have seen now that it's been more than 6 months when NETmundial was started, basically somewhere September, October last year. And there will be definitely not enough time to prepare. Whether we need the NETmundial within the next 12 months, that was also the question. Some people said that maybe we need another NETmundial, but within the next 3 or 4 years to move on. So I don't think this is realistic. I don't think it's going to take place. And the main dilemma is whether we are going to see NETmundial 2 or not. It was interesting that, at least that's my observation, when the whole discussion started, the hashtag for NETmundial was NETmundial. Later on, it changed to NETmundial 2014. And that was the official hashtag. Now, NETmundial is not really quite an often used word on Twitter besides this context, so it could have stayed NETmundial. It's possible that someone had in mind, let's just mark it in case we need another round of that. But to be honest, my impression is, at the moment, we are not talking about it.
And I think, let me just add, rather, there is the increasing fatigue of the internet governance meetings now. When you think you have the LUCIS process, you have IGF, you have London conference process, London fall next year, Hague, you have the freedom of expression, which will be next week in Estonia. Many think tanks, many academia. I think there is increasing fatigue with too many parallel processes, and I'm sure that there was sort of tacit support for that to have just another NETmundial. Okay. If you don't have any other question, well, best regards from Sao Paulo. We will be providing more information and reflection, more academic reflection through our Geneva Internet platform site. For those friends who are based in Geneva, we'll be seeing each other next week on Thursday. I hope my voice will be better.
Well, for all the others, we'll see each other, if you wish, on 6th of May for the next round of monthly Internet governance webinars from Geneva, where we are also going to touch upon NETmundial, but we'll try to reflect to the other processes like Freedom Online Conference, the ITU process, ICON, and try to put a bigger perspective. So join us on 6th of May, if not earlier. Thank you.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.